This is Gemara and Chagigah Daf Chof Vav. All the learning for this month has been generously sponsored as Chos Ilin Neshama for Rav Shlomo ben Rameir. Learning the entire Chabura, complete Meseches Chagigah and Seder Mayid should bring an incredible Ilin Neshama to Rav Shlomo ben Rameir in conjunction with the release of our new Sefer, the laws of Chanukah and Purim. Mir Hashem, the learning of the entire Chabura should bring an incredible Aliyah Neshama, as well as the Schoshirach V'Shalchaim Mitzvah Shemir Rasi Yizakil Shanes Shalmakol Erchav V'Shavshinda Sikta V'Shavshendel Shema Ben Chayo V'Bein Tali Shavon V'Zahava, as well as the Schoshirach V'Shalchaim Shal Yis Ben Rafid Ben V'Bein Chaim Mitzvah Shal Simon Rizos Erbas Knandi Yidabas Yim Schei Sarah Yosef Yalba Ben Dalei Zaparas Ben Shalei Shalom Zami V'Shavik V'Shavchan Shmo V'Tilden V'Chariz V'Cham V'Svina Tinin V'Shavnei L'Tziv V'Vik V'Erv V'Kasishan V'Tavsilim V'Chlaster Amr Ben Yaakov Zar Bas Kil Shemizach Ben Yehudis V'Lavram Ben Rachladai Shemim Ben Chanav Galber Bas Esther Yal Yehudis Bas Le'Yoshav Ben Gabriel Bas Lum Yisrael Yitzchak Ben Dina V'Soyin Sha'ar Chayli Yisrael. We're holding in the very bottom of Chav Hey Amid Beis, the second to last day of Meseches Chagigah and the entirety of Seder Mayid. A few important announcements. First of all, today's daf, as you can imagine, we're going to pull up a little bit short so that tomorrow's daf will be a little bit longer, not just a very, very short shiur. Number one. Number two, apologies that the shiur is getting up so late. And number three is apologies for all those who are hoping to meet and hoping to celebrate Seder Mayid together on Tuesday night. Unfortunately, the siyum will not be happening, but still I'm hoping to be able to see and meet and celebrate with as many people as possible. But let's pick it up from the Mishnah on the bottom of Chavei Amid Beis, and we're continuing the different halachos of Truma versus Kachim. The parak began in which we could call Kachim on a higher pedestal than Truma, and then we segued into the past day or two in which we had Truma on a higher pedestal than Kachim, and it's at that point that we pick up from today. So says the Mishnah, Min HaMoidim Lifnim, from a place called Moedim, which is 15 mil out of Yushalayim, and inwards closer to Yushalayim. Ne'emanim, the Amaratzim, who generally are not Ne'emanim, they do not have a believability. But from Moedim, a place 15 mil out and inward, they have a believability al Kli Cheres, on earthenware vessels. So we don't exactly know what's going on here, but one thing we know about earthenware vessels is that once they become Tameh, they're done. You destroy them, there's nothing else that could be done with them. So for some reason, we're giving a specific kula, specific leniency from Moedim and inward towards Yushalayim with regard to the believability of an Ama'aret with regard to their Tumah V'Taira status. But min Moedim lachutz, from this place called Median and outward, then Ein Nemanim, then the Amaretz does not have any Na'amanis. Says the Mishnah, Ketzad, what exactly is going on over here? Hakadash you have a kader, you have a potter, someone who creates pottery that he is selling his kederais, he is selling his pots. What is halacha? Nichlas lefnim min hamoedim. If he enters inward from Moedim, again, this place called Moedim, and inward towards Yushalayim, who hakadar v'hein hakadeiros v'hein alekuchin ne'eman, then he's believed yatzei ne'eman. So you see, when the Mishnah points out that there's a believability, there are three details that the Mishnah hones in on. The three details that the Mishnah hones in on were Hu HaKadar, Hein HaKadeiros, and lastly, Hein HaLoichin, which is teaching us that all three of them have to go together. It's not just that the potter enters in, it's not just that the people enter in, it's that this person comes in from Moedim to Yushalayim. The people see him come in, and the people see him bringing in his pottery. When you have those three elements coinciding, that is where there is an amanis, there is a believability. It's not just the fact that he's there, it's those three elements that happen together. Says the Gemara, what exactly is the story with this place called Moedim? Tana, we learned in the Mishnah, 2 lines on the bottom. Moedim, the city Moedim itself. The Mishnah said Moedim and inward, Moedim and outward. So whenever a Gemara does this, we always have the obvious question, what about the place Moedim itself? So Moedim, Pa'amim kilefnim, Upa'amim kilechutz. There's sometimes it has this din like inward, sometimes it's din like outward. Ketzad, what's the case? Kader yoitzi v'chaver nichnas. If the kader, if the potter is leaving, he's on his way outward, and kader yoitzi say, the kadr, the potter, is leaving. The v'chaver nichnas, and the Talmud Chacham is entering inward, and then in moedian they meet. So the guy is walking out with his pot, and the other Talmud Chacham is walking inward, and they cross in moediim kilefnim. Then it's like inward, and then there is an amanis over there, and the Talmud Chacham could buy the pots from this potter. Shneim nichnasim, as we turn over to Chavavam and Aleph, Shneim Yaitzim, both the Talmud Chacham and the potter are both leaving or they're both entering in, and they're in Moedim, they're not past that border. Shneim Yaitzim Kilachutz, and they both have a din of Chutz, and there's no believability of the Ha'aretz, and the Talmud Chacham would not be allowed to buy the pot from him over there. So Amar Abaye says, Abaye hones in on the wording of the Mishnah and says the Mishnah is precise, the way that you just explained it. The kadr, the potter that's selling his pots, and he enters inward lifnim and amoidiyim. It says in the Mishnah that he's inward from amoidiyim. So what's the obvious implication? Time of the lifnim. It's because he's inward. Ha-moedim gufa itself, the city of Moedim, loy mehaman, there would be no believability. But that ain't my seifa. What did the end of the Mishnah say? The opposite implication. Yatsa, when he goes out, ain't an eman. Ha-moedim gufa, but the city itself, ne'eman. So which way do we do it? What is the status of the city itself? Elalav says the Gemara, Shma'amina, how do we reconcile the opposite implications of the Mishnah? We must say, when the potter is on his way out and the Chaver Talmud Chacham is on his way in, and they hit in Moedian, that is where there's a believability of that city. But they're both going out, and they're both coming in, Shma'amina, that there's no believability and you cannot buy it from him in Moedian. Tana says the Gemara. Now we'll get a little bit deeper into this case. What is this Nemanis of the Ha'aretz? Tana. Ne'eman b'kli hadakin la kodesh. They're ne'eman specifically with their on the small earthenware vessels, and for what? For kachim. However, larger vessels or smaller vessels used for truma, they're not believed. So the chumrah of truma over kachim, for kachim, they're believed in the small earthenware vessels. Amar Reish Lakish explains, it's a size that can be held in one hand. So Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish, how large can this earthenware vessel be? Reish Lakish says it has to be one-handed vessel. Rabbi Yochanan says a two-handed vessel. Amar Reish Lakish says I hold it in one hand. It's only when the vessel is empty. But if the vessel is full, then there is no believability to the Ha'aretz. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Afilu Malay, and Rabbi Yochanan says that even if the vessel is full, Va'afilu, not only is it only if it's full, even if it's full, Va'afilu Aparkisusa Letoicha, even if the clothing of the Ha'aretz is inside this vessel, there still is a believability that once they're believed in the item, Rabbi Yochanan goes all the way. Rabbi Yochanan says even when it's held in two hands, and even if the article of clothing, which generally of an Ha'aretz is tamei, because Ha'aretz is not makbid, is not specific about Tumah V'Taira, still there would believe a believability. You would have an amanis on this utensil. V'amar Rava comes in to point out that when Rabbi Yochanan says it's full, Rabbi Yochanan says held the two hands, Rabbi Yochanan says the kilm of Ha'aretz, explains Rav on the last narrow line. But there is one case Rabbi Yochanan does admit. B'mashkin atzman shein tamein. The liquid themselves in the vessel is tar, but the liquid in the vessel is tamei. And now you might wonder, I don't understand. The vessel is tar, but the liquid is tamei. How could that be? Says Rava, don't be bothered by such a question. Again, in the world of the Rabbanan, the Din the Rabbanan, they're allowed to make such specifications and such splits within one item. Sharei login, shalat mali mashkin. But we have a vessel, a log, a jug that is filled with liquids. Login tamein, the vessel is tamei. So it's a little bit of the opposite case. Tamein tumasheva, oh mashkin tahayred. But Rav is pointing out that there is times that we have a split. The liquids inside are tar, even though the vessel is tamei. We spoke about this a few days ago. It's an earthenware vessel that's sitting between two floors of a house. So the earthenware vessel will block the tumah and the items inside will be tar. And similar in our case, says the Gemara, that even if the liquid is tamei, the reverse case, the vessel could still be tar. And we continue with the next Mishnah, the final two chumras of Truma over Kodesh. Says that the Mishnah, Chavav and Beis, the second white line, Agabayim shenichnasin l'toich abayis. The Gabayim, the Gizbar, the agents of the Beis HaMikdash. Actually, we'll see it's not necessarily the Beis HaMikdash, it's actually any type of collector. That's what the word here, Gabayim, means. That enter in the house, and similarly, if someone steals something from a house, but then Shachzir Zakilim wants to return the item, that money they're believed, Loimar, we did not touch anything. The item is still tar, even though they themselves might not have been particular about Tumah V'Tayra, but they're having amanas to say what they touched and what they did not touch. Ubi Yerushalayim, Neman ala Kodesh, Lebanon Kachim, and B'shas Regel, Afal Chuma. So again, another chumrah about Chuma, that in Kachim they're always believed, but by Chuma they only believed B'shas Regel, the time of Yantif. Says the Gemara, 1 second. The Mishnah just taught us that the Gabayim, these collectors, the tax collectors or whatnot, when they go in, they have an amanas, they are believed. For Eminu asked the Gemara in the fourth white line, the exact opposite. The right says the Bayis is Tameh. And you were saying the Gabayim are believed. Answers the Gemara, one is there's a guy with him, and one is when there's a guy not with him. So what's the difference? Who cares? He has a guy that's a tax collector, a Jewish tax collector that comes into the house, so there's a mega difference if there's a guy with him. Explains the Gemara, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah. If there's a guy with them, they have a believability. But they're not believed to say we went in, nichnasu. We didn't touch anything. They asked the Gemara, I don't understand, like we just pointed out. Who cares if he has a guy with him? That's a reason for him to be believed or not. Explains the Gemara, yes, two reasons. One says the reason being the Emas. Nachri Alayu, he's fearful of the Nachri, he's fearful of the guy, that the guy might be on top of him and be overbearing and punish him if he doesn't act accordingly. And therefore, when he's into the house, he touches everything, he searches around, he doesn't want the guy to punish him. So therefore, in that case, everything is going to be tameh. But in a regular case where there's no guy, then the yid is believed to say what he touched and what he did not touch. No, it's the fear of the king that's upon them. And when there's a guy there, worry the guy is going to go back to the king and tell them he did search properly, he did not search properly. Therefore, in that case, everything will be tameh. But in the other case, if the guy is not there, then the yid will have a believability to say what he touched and what he did not. What's the difference between these two explanations? A guy which is not chashiv, and therefore one is not worried he's going to punish him, but even if you're not chashiv, you still could slander back to the king. That will be the nafkamina on the two answers. It continues the Gemara. That returns items that he stole, he as well has believability. V'Raminu asked the Gemara a similar contradiction. It says the Brisa, a ganav that enters his house only makes tamei the area that he himself walks. So of course, that's not like the Mishnah, in which the Mishnah seemed to have said he could point out what he touched and what he did not. No, our Mishnah is talking about where he did tshuva, and therefore he's believed to say what he touched. And the wording in the Mishnah is precise. It says he returned the items. He's about tshuva, he's returning what he stole. In that case particularly, he has an amanas to say what he touched and what he did not. Continues the Gemara of Yerushalayim, but in Yerushalayim there's an extra believability on Kachim. Explains the Gemara, what are they believed about the large kli cheres, the large earthenware vessels for Kachim? Now finally, we've been learning together for 15 minutes today and wondering what is the special din about this kli cheres, that there was a believability by Modin, and we keep on seeing certain stringencies. Why? Kol kach lama, explains the Gemara, she'ein oisin kivshanais b'Yushalayim. There were no kilns. They did not make earthenware vessels in Yerushalayim, whether it's caused the smoke, we get the walls of Yerushalayim dirty, whether it's caused the smoke, would mix with the smoke of the Ketayres. Whatever the reason being, they would not be allowed to make earthenware vessels in Yerushalayim, and therefore, and as we pointed out, that once a vessel becomes tamei, everything inside is tamei. Another shita holds anytime you cook a carbon in a vessel, you have to break that earthenware vessel. So because of that, the availability of earthenware vessels was not great, and that is the reason in which we have specific kulas with regard to these kli cheres. It says the Gemara, "B'shas haregel afalet shuma." Shas haregel believed even on the chuma menan immediately. How do we know that Rabbi Shua and Levi are makra? We learned it out from the pasuk. V'yasev kol ish Yisrael el ir kish achad chaverim. That the pasuk says, "They'll gather everyone together like one man." Hakalsov asan kulu chaverim. That on Yom Tif we consider everyone like one, and therefore with regard to truma on Yom Tif, even the Amaret has a believability. And now we have another Mishnah, many Mishnayos today, about 12 lines. For the end of the Amud of Chavav Amud Aleph, HaPoseach Chavitoi V'Amaschal B'Yisasai Al Gav HaRegel. If someone opens up a barrel, if someone begins dealing with his dough on Yom Tif, on the time of the Yom Tif, Rav Yehuda Mer Yigmar, and we just said that there's a special kula on the time of Yom Tif. What about when Yom Tif ends? Says Rav Yehuda Yigmar, even after Yom Tif, the Ma'aretz is allowed to finish selling the items. And of course, the chiddush here is that as you sell something, as you deal with the dough, we assume that everyone's touching the dough. So really it should be tamei. So we have a special kula, special leniency with the time of Yom Tif, that we assume the dough is not going to be tamei. But what about after Yom Tif? Yom Tif is over. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yud says, you're still allowed to sell, and the Chachamim say, you are not. Says the Gemara, Yotzer Rav Ami, Rav Yitzchak Navcha, Kula, Rav Yitzchak Navcha, Pasach Chad V'Amar. They were sitting and one opened up his mouth and he said, after you open it up. So we had a debate in the Mishnah whether you could continue selling it and complete the sale, or you let it save it for the next Yom Tif. We just said in Yom Tif, the Amaratzim, there's no Tama. We assume everything they touch is Sultahar. So you let it save the item, the wine, the dough for the next Yom Tif. Amar Le'idach, the other one responds, everyone's touching the items, and you're suggesting you should leave it over, meaning, of course it's tamei. The whole reason it wasn't tamei during Yom Tif is a special kula. But of course, the moment Yom Tif over, it's tamei. How can you suggest to save it for the next Yom Tif? So Amar Lei, but he responded, what do you mean? Even now on Yom Tif, everyone's touching it. And yet, there's a special dispensation that on Yom Tif it's tar, so maybe that allows us to save for next Yom Tif. Amar Lei, let me explain. It makes sense on Yom Tif. The Toma of an Amaretz, the Torah says is tar, there's no Toma right now. But now when Yom Tif is over, Tamei, it's Tamei. And therefore, that is the reason why you cannot leave it for the next Yom Tif. So we have a bit of a machlekes here. You're allowed to leave it over or not. And therefore, but often it suggests the Gemara, Nema Ketanoi. Let's say this machlekes, whether you're allowed to leave it for the next Yom Tif, is in truth the machlekes Tanoim. One Mishnah learned in the regular acher, Tani the regular acher. We have two different prices. One says leave it over, and one says not. So what is this machlekes my love? Tanoi, it's a machlekes Tanoim. Whether you should leave over for the next Yom Tif. Explains the Gemara, what does it mean you should leave for the next Yom Tif? That's Rav Yehuda. That's the sheet of Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah that said Yigmar, you could complete the sale. So he allowed you to save it for the next Yom Tif. That says you can't leave it over. And that's going to be the machlekes. So it's not a new machlekes Tanoim. It's really the same machlekes as our Mishnah. Rav Yehuda versus the Chachamim, but it's not a machlekes Tanoim within the sheet of the Chachamim. But I asked the Gemara of Tizbra, is what you're suggesting logical? Rav Yehuda Yigmar Kam. Rav Yehuda didn't say you could leave it over. He said you could complete it. Rav Yehuda Yigmar Kam. Rav Yehuda said you could complete it. The opposite. When he says you can't leave it over, that's Rav Yehuda. Because what did Rav Yehuda say? Finish it, but you can't leave it over to the next Yom Tif. And when he said you can leave it over, it's Rabbanan. You don't need to leave it over, but in truth, the Gemara is not found that indeed it is a machlekes Tanoim or not. And now we continue with another Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, another halacha of the din of Tumah V'Taira as it relates to Amaratzim on Yontif, Misha Avar Arego, when Yontif passes by, Ma'avirin al Tairas Azara. What do? You remove all the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash to make it tar. Avar Arega when Yontif, but if Yontif ended L'Yom HaShishi on a Friday, L'Yom HaAvirenu, they wouldn't take out the kelim on a Friday to make them tar. Why? When they covered Shabbos, everyone's busy preparing for Shabbos, so now is not the time to make the kelim tar. Not even on Thursday. The Kahanim are not free. Says the Gemara, why are the Kohanim not free? Because on Yontif, all the ashes were left on the Mizbeach, a big pile on the center of the Mizbeach, as it's a kavod, that all the karbonis get piled, all the ashes. But after Yontif, you got to clear it out. So says Rabbi Yehuda, even if Yontif ended on a Thursday, there was no time for the Kohanim. Now let's just point out, why are they being mitayir? Why are they purifying the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash? The basic reason is, this is pinning off of the previous Mishnayos, that the Amaratzim, even the Kohanim Amaratzim, would come to the Beis HaMikdash, and they would touch different vessels, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach, the Menaira, and it would make them tamei. So on Yontif itself, we saw that the dinim of Tumah v'Tayra are waived. But after Yontif, they would go and be mitayir them. Says the Mishnah, continuing, how would they do the purification process to purify the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash? Explains the Gemara, they would put the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash into the mikvah. They would immerse them and purify them. And throughout the entire Yontif, they would tell the Kohanim Amaratzim Hizaru, be careful as we turn over to Chavav Mebeis. Shaloi Tigu, don't touch the Shulchan. The reason being is we'll see because the Shulchan there was no way to be mitayir. Kol hakelim shayei b'mikdash, all the kelim in the Beis HaMikdash, Yishlam Shnim U'Shlishim. There were secondary and third replacements of them that you could bring them in when they would purify the original ones. Shem Netau Harish and Yaveu Shnim Medachleim. If the original ones were tum, they would bring the other ones in. Kol hakelim shayei b'mikdash, do not tell them everything needs to be tvoivel to be purifying it. Chutz. Why? If it's because they're called karka land that doesn't makabel tama, or because in mitzupin it's plated and that's the reason why it's not makabel tama. So the Mishnah is teaching us they would bring out the kelim to purify them. Let's just begin the Gemara. Tana. We learned in the Mishnah is Haru Shema Tigu B'Shulchan Ubi Menaira, that they would tell them not to be careful, don't touch the Shulchan or the Menaira. Our Mishnah said to be careful in the top line Shlo Tigu B'Shulchan, but this other Mishnah says that they should be careful not only with the Shulchan, but they should be careful with the Menaira as well. But Tana Didan, my Tana Lo Tana Menaira. So why didn't our Mishnah say Menaira? Explains the Gemara, Shulchan Ksiv Beitamid. By the Shulchan it says has to always be there. The showbread, the lechem ha'aponim has to be there constantly. Because of that, you can never purify it. You can never take it out. Now you could if it became tamei. We have to be extremely careful to keep it there tamei. But by the Menaira, it doesn't say tamei, so therefore there wasn't as much of a concern. Says the Gemara ve'edach. What does the Brayso hold? It says the Menaira should be opposite the Shulchan. So the Menaira is as if the same halachas of the Shulchan is as if it says tamei. Ve'edach. What does the other man Damar hold? No. What does it mean as a Menaira noichach Shulchan? Doesn't mean that's the same halacha. It has to be their tamid. All it means is that's the placement of the Menaira is opposite the Shulchan. Ask the Gemara once again. The kli'etz also lenachasu. Why don't we say that the Shulchan cannot become tamei? Why don't we say it's a kli'etz? It's a wooden table which is not made. Which is made to remain stationary, and therefore what explains the Gemara of Chol Kli'etz also lenachas. It's not makabel tama. So what's the problem in the first place? My time, or what's the reason it's not makabel tama? Because the sack tama is similar to a sack being a masak mitalton mali varekam. A sack is carried empty and full of kol mitalton mali varekam. So a shulchan which is not carrying mali varekam, it's not carried full and empty. A shulchan stays stationary with the lechem hapanim on it. Why is it mekabel tama? Why is it susceptible to be impure in the first place? Explains the Gemara. Not mitalton mali varekam. No, the shulchan they always moved. What do you mean? Who kidirei shlakish? Amrei Reish Lakish Ma'idach say about the meaning of the pasuk al shulchan atar al shulchan atar. The pasuk says you should place the lechem habanim on the shulchan hatar, the pure shulchan. Mechlal shu tamei. It sounds like it's able to be tamei, but why? You just told me it remains stationary. V'amai klei tazulin achasu. We just said the shulchan is going to remain stationary. They can't become tamei. Ve'inu mekabel tama. Elam elamed. You know what it teaches us? Shemagbiin oisa yumar noili regalim. That when everyone would come to the regular and Yontif, they would pick up the shulchan and they would show it to everyone. Lechem habanim v'aimrim lahem, and say to them, Ru'uchi b'haschem l'nei hamakoim. Look how much Hashem loves you. That what? See, look like you see durai. When you remove the bread, it's just like when you put it in. That it's as hot as it was in the beginning. There was an incredible naze with lechem hapanim. That it was placed. It was the same heat. It was the same freshness as when they put the lechem on. As when they took it off. And therefore, it suggests the Gemara that is the reason why that the shulchan indeed was a movable entity. Why was it a movable entity? Because they would pick it up to show it to everyone during either regalim, so everyone would see how much Hashem loves us. So the shulchan was indeed able to be makabel tamah, and that's why we need a pasuk of tamid. And we'll pick it up from here tomorrow when we conclude the Chagigah and tamid b'siyato dishmaya.